What's up?
They worked. I was like, oh no,
I
I'm gonna
know.
miss it.
No, you're good. I was classic me finishing a bike workout and like rushing to get everything ready. So,
Yeah, that's cool. We'll just get set up.
yeah.
Uh,
So we've got yeah, I figure we wait like a couple minutes and let kind of everyone join as I just started the video, but and then for all you who are tuning in, if you have any additional questions, feel free. We'll just be kind of reading the comments um, as the live goes on, and we'll answer as much as we can. And 45 minutes,
yeah.
an hour, however long it's going to take. We've already got an awesome list of questions to talk about, so
Okay.
we're excited to share. But well, I guess we can kind of get started if you'd like, Scott. And I figured we'd just kind of introduce ourselves. My followers probably know a lot about me, but I'm sure they don't really know a lot about you. So if you just kind of want to tell everyone who you are, what you do, how we're working together.
Yeah. Thanks, Caitlin. So my name is Scott Tindal. I'm one of the co-founders of Fuelin, which is the world's first training-based nutrition app. So what that means is it syncs directly with your coach's training program. So if you have a training program that is on Training Peaks, Today's Plan, or Final Surge, then we sync with that and provide you with a daily nutrition program. So it means that every meal before, during, and after the session, based on the duration and the intensity of those sessions, is going to get covered. And so whatever your purpose, whether that's improvements in body composition or weight loss, or ultimately for performance or high performance, then we will have you covered. And so, yeah, Caitlin and I have been working together for a number of months, and some of which we'll cover today, which will be really great, about some of her insights into daily nutrition, and then obviously into high performance nutrition and fueling for her race results, which is ultimately what we're about, and getting her to go as fast as possible.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I reached out to Scott, you know, though I've been doing triathlon for 10, 15 years, and I've always just kind of like made up my own nutrition plan. It's kind of been an afterthought. I haven't really, specifically dialed anything in until I started working with Scott. And this past year, I did 3 Ironmans that were in pretty hot and humid environments. And I hadn't traditionally done a lot of hot and humid races before because I know that I just struggle a lot with fluid intake. And I really struggled during those races. I really, really struggled in Kona specifically this last year. And I was like, after Kona, I was like, okay, I need some professional help because I don't know what I'm doing. And like, I know the basics and it got me this far, but like for me to get to the next level, I needed professional help. And so I reached out to Scott, and yeah, we've been working together since I think October. Like I reached out to you right after Kona last year. I was like, I need help.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been great so far. I've learned so much just about like daily training and sorry, daily nutrition for training as well as performance nutrition. And I didn't realize like what I was missing. And so that's kind of like one of the reasons why I wanted to do this Instagram live, was to just kind of give you all, an idea of like how important nutrition and hydration are, just not from a performance and racing standpoint, but for just kind of like your daily activity levels and training levels. So
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways for athletes to think about this, and it's something certainly that you've talked to me about, is like, obviously your coach gives you your training and in a very structured format, which is, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I guess that's what we're doing with nutrition with Fuel In, is giving you structured nutrition on a day-to-day basis to maximize ultimately your performance, but also your health. And so I think it's once athletes can get their head around, okay, I need structure in my nutrition to support my daily training, then it becomes sort of like, oh, okay, there's that light bulb moment, and that it just becomes second nature.
absolutely. And you really explained it well. That is what the app is like. I'll log on in the mornings and, if, depending on how many training sessions I have that day, I pretty much have everything laid out in terms of like what I need to eat before, what I need to eat after, like afternoon snacks, what to eat for dinner, tracking my macros, all of that stuff. And that had always been an afterthought for me. And like I thought I was getting enough, nutrients in on a daily basis. And then when I actually started tracking things, I was like, wow, I really am not getting in like everything that I thought I needed to get in.
And
So
let's touch on that, because I think it's so important for everyone to understand that. Like, you're a professional athlete, but you're also a health professional.
yeah,
So you're a physical therapist and you work on a day-to-day basis. And so I think that afterthought of fueling or food is something that we've discussed on many occasions. Is like, and we're not talking about meal prepping per se, like, tubs and tubs of plastic containers in fridges. It's like just being prepared, looking at what your day is the next day, and you going, okay, I need something like to have my snack before my morning swim, and then I need to prepare something as simple as overnight oats,
yeah,
to make sure you get your fuel in, that then allows you to go to work and then work on other people. And I think,
yeah.
you know, I think we can always get lost in the science, but it's sometimes like the simple practicalities of you just being going, oh, gee, I need to eat something after the session. And how do I do that? That's, for
Yeah.
me, that's been one of the most rewarding things working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can kind of touch on, I know this was like one of our talking points towards the end, but just about um, like unintentional underfueling, because I think that is like a really big problem, especially for endurance athletes, for Ironman triathletes who are doing like multiple training sessions a day and training, 10, 20, upwards of 30 hours a week. And for me, my work schedule has always been like pretty busy and like yes, I'm a professional athlete, but first and foremost, I'm a physical therapist and like that's my career and that's always what I'll put first, sometimes to a fault. And not last year, but the year before, I was a year out of school. Things were really picking up in the clinic. My hours were crazy and I was still trying to get my training in. And I would have really long days at work where, I'd work 6 to 7 hours without a break, or maybe just like a 30-minute break to eat lunch. Some days I didn't even have a lunch break and I'd go, the whole day almost without really drinking any water, without really eating anything. But like, under a lot of stress. So like, I just didn't have an appetite to eat. And, I didn't really think anything of it. I ate breakfast, I'd eat dinner at night, and I didn't think that like those hours during the day where I just like wasn't fueling were really significantly impacting my training. And, after doing that for a couple months, I ended up like sustaining like the first stress fracture, like bone stress injury I've ever had in my life. And like, that was a big wake up call for me that, no, this like, I wasn't like, I wasn't intentionally under fueling, but it was just kind of like an afterthought. And I was like, this needs to be a priority for me.
Yeah, and I think any time an athlete is suffering from a stress reaction or a stress fracture, it's probably a big sort of, warning sign to you that you probably are underfueling. And whether, as you said, it's unintentional or intentional, you should probably be seeking advice from a health professional to get looking at your energy balance and making sure that actually you're not going into, chronic sort of caloric deficit at that point. Because I know a lot of athletes are aware of low energy availability and then RED-S, or relative energy deficiency in sport. It is more prevalent in female athletes than male athletes, but it does occur. It still happens with male athletes. So whether you are male or female, still be very aware of those warning signs. And, a warning sign that's obviously down the line is something like a stress fracture, but there are earlier warning signs, things that Caitlin touched on. So maybe low energy, erratic training, low mood, low libido. For a female, if menstrual cycle becomes irregular or absent, certainly that's a clear warning sign. For men, if morning erections, if you're not getting 4 or 5 of those in a week, then that can be a sign for men that they're actually underfueling. So there are clear signs there. Sleep disturbances, sweats at night, all of these are signs and symptoms of potentially you are underfueling. And not doing yourself, a service when you're trying to maximize ultimately your performance.
Yeah. And I think the research shows when it comes to bone stress injuries that even like a period of like 5 days where you're under fueling can like significantly increase your risk for developing a bone stress injury. So it's like if you had 1 week that was really stressful and like you didn't eat well at work or you didn't sleep well, but your training stimulus and stress still stayed the same. That's just putting you at an increased risk for developing a bone stress injury. So
Yeah, I mean, and even you go bring it even more acute, you look at the impact that carbohydrates has on these bone mineral markers, and even just removing carbohydrates from post-session fueling can have a negative impact on those bone markers. So again, like if you are going this high fat, low carb or ketogenic diet and you're laying down fairly intense long duration training, just try and get an understanding, or at least picture there are a lot of implications of those types of diets on potentially the health of the individual athlete. And I think it is really important. I know a lot of people will follow higher fat, lower carb diets for whatever reason, but there are some negative implications, and it's more recent research that's coming out about that and the importance of carbohydrates post-session for bone health. So it's just, again, something to flag and something to think about. If you're interested in that, certainly you can reach out to us.
yeah, for sure. And just kind of piggybacking off of like post-workout fueling, I think one of the biggest things I didn't realize before I started or after I started working with you was my protein intake. And I, would supplement with like a protein shake, protein powder after workouts, and eat, I don't follow any kind of dietary restrictions. I eat meat, dairy, all of that stuff. And so, I'd have that on a daily basis. And when I started tracking everything, I realized I was getting maybe like a half or 2/3 the amount of protein I actually needed to get in. And so that's been like kind of a big, you know, kind of thing to address that has really helped me just like recover from my training and absorb all of that stress. So I know a lot of people have questions about, what is the recommended protein intake, based on your body weight or based on your activity level, but maybe you can touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think it's always very interesting for endurance athletes to talk about protein, because I think it's come a long way, I think, in the last probably 6 to 12 months with endurance athletes going, okay, maybe I'm not going to become the Hulk and I'm not going to lay on a heap of extra muscle and get bulky. I think hopefully the majority of athletes are beyond that now. I think in your case, again, high training volume, and under supplying yourself with that protein is going to have the potential negative impacts of delaying, muscle recovery. So we can look at, you're probably not going to put on a whole lot of muscle during the season, but one of the goals is at least to maintain and retain that lean muscle mass and not hopefully lose any. So having that higher amount of protein on a per kilogram basis is certainly going to help with retention of lean mass. And then I think probably, again, related to bone, related to tendon, related to muscle, that higher circulating amount of amino acids through the body is going to allow you to recover better from all those body systems. And I mean, at the moment, so what are you taking in on a daily basis in terms of grams?
I think you have me at 130.
Yeah. So 130 mightn't sound very high for a lot of people, but if we actually look at the grams per kilo body weight, it probably equates to around 2.2 grams per kilo body weight. So Caitlin will vary somewhere between 2 and 2.5 grams per kilo body weight, depending on need for extra calories, just in the form of protein, but also depending on intensity and duration of trainings. But she'll generally always be at least 2 grams or above for protein intake, which again doesn't always sound that much, but I think the reality is she was probably consuming 70 to 80 grams per day, and well and truly under fueling or under servicing herself in protein. And like, a protein shake is very good. Like, I don't think well, I'm certainly not going to argue with a protein shake, whether it's a whey based or a plant based protein shake, but you cannot rely on that for your entire protein intake for the day. I mean, what other thing, like what foods have you started gravitating towards to try and boost up your protein intake?
So I know you've tried to get me on the canned salmon, but I just can't do that. I canned salmon, canned tuna, um, it's just not my thing. But I like, I would eat, traditionally like a bagel with butter or like toast with butter and jam or something in the mornings, and like that really has no protein in it. And so I've been trying to add some peanut butter. It's not a very like high protein food
And
source,
this
but
is your snack you're talking about before the
no,
session.
yeah, like in the morning
Yeah.
before training, before my first session. Sometimes yogurt, like I can usually tolerate yogurt pretty well before sessions, and sometimes an egg as well. But that's like my breakfast before my first session. And then for like lunch and dinner, always thinking about like what kind of protein source I have. I know I loved your tip of buying the rotisserie chicken and just kind of like shredding it and having it, in a container in the fridge just to like snack on. And that's super easy. It's not too expensive. And you can just like add that to salads and to different meals. Which has been great. And the Fuelin app has some really awesome recipes as well, based on like, what my carbohydrate intake should be for that day. I've logged on a couple times and I'm like, I don't know what I want to make for dinner. Like, I can't decide. And so I'll log in to see like what recipes are recommended based on like what my dietary intake should be that day. So I usually try to pick like a meat source, not every day. Sometimes I'll do some sort of like bean or legume or something like that has some protein in it, but or fish as well. But it's definitely like now on the forefront of my mind, like making sure there is a high protein source of food with every meal.
Yeah, and I think like, plant sources can be effective for boosting some of that protein content. Obviously, depending on what you want to read and whatnot, make sure they're mixed sources of those plant proteins, just to allow you to get the full complement of amino acids. I think things like you touched on, like fish, obviously, like I push fish pretty heavily, especially small oily fish. So, for those athletes, obviously I did try and get Caitlin to eat more small oily fish. So even things like sardines and anchovies on toast in the morning. It's not everyone's thing, but it certainly will help you in terms of getting some essential fatty acids as along with that protein. I think
Yeah.
eggs are fantastic if your dietary preference allows you to consume eggs, whole eggs, and then if you want to add in some extra egg whites for some extra protein is good if you're trying to limit fat. Fortifying foods is something we've also talked about. So this is where something like a yogurt, so something like a Chobani zero fat yogurt, the one with the blue rim, that's very good. If you add in an extra scoop of plant-based protein or whey-based protein into that, that can give you an extra 25 grams. So something as simple as that, just fortifying your food, can be a really effective way of getting, that first meal of the day, or at least that first post-session meal of the day, with at least, 30 to 40 grams of protein, which, as Caitlin said, across the duration of the day, it's getting the amounts of protein in, not necessarily pulsing for any particular reasons, apart from just allowing her to hit her total protein intake for the day.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just got a question, a really good question. I'll read it because I think it was kind of one that we had picked as well. But the question is, Scott, what are the biggest myths you can help us avoid regarding nutrition and performance nutrition that are important not only for athletes and their coaches, but for the general population as well? So biggest nutrition myths to debunk.
Yeah, I'd say that carbs are evil. That's probably the biggest one. I think, not just, again, for Gen Pop, remember that carbohydrates, and this is something like I talked to Caitlin about, and I've probably talked to every athlete about, is carbohydrates come from vegetables as well. So vegetables and salad will provide you with carbohydrates. And if you're not eating vegetables and salad, then you're missing out on fiber, which ultimately is going to be very good for the gut. And most people are now getting clued into the importance of the gut and the relationship between that and the rest of the body. You're missing out on a whole lot of micronutrients. So as soon as you start to eliminate carbohydrates, certainly in the form of fruits and vegetables, you're certainly impacting a myriad of health components that, you know, again, we've done talks on the importance of fruit and vegetable intake to overall health, but also to sleep quality. Then I think, you know, eliminating carbohydrates from your diet is probably the number one myth that I would like to stamp on its head. The second one would be is trying to race. If you are an athlete, trying to race on low carb is certainly a myth that I think is pretty much being extinguished now. So you can do a race on high fat. It's just you probably are not going to perform as well as someone who is on high carb. And I think that has been fairly well established through scientific literature over and over again. So again, it doesn't mean that every meal has to be super high carbohydrate. It doesn't mean every training session has to be super high carbohydrate. Depending on the intensity will dictate that. But when you are going fast or want to go fast and need to produce a lot of power, then carbohydrates are certainly going to be your best friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's kind of dive into some of the training nutrition a little bit. I've touched a little bit like on my stories just about like all the testing that we've been doing, and you know, like my protocols for training. And I am really treating my nutrition, my training nutrition, like I treat my training. So like, you know, I'll prep for my training session, you know, look at what my workout is going to be, swim, bike, or run. And I'll do the same thing for nutrition. Like, you know, what is my milliliter fluid intake supposed to be like, my electrolytes, grams of carbs per hour, grams of fat, depending on like what intensity session I'm doing. But I guess, what is your kind of reasoning behind doing like all of this testing, like in training on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I think the thing that always gets me about athletes and in particular triathlon or endurance athletes is they get very close to a race event. And they're like, okay, now can you do a race plan for me? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And they're sort of like, well, what do I need to eat in that race? And it's like, surely you've been practicing this all the way through your training in the weeks leading up for a number of reasons. And I think the first one is from a practical standpoint, like, can you actually carry the nutrition, the products on your bike, and then can you carry them on the run? And will that allow you to hit the amount that you require? So I think that's probably the first and one of the most important reasons for doing this. I think the second one is actually then training the gut. So again, talking to Caitlin and looking at it is like some athletes will have issues with high carbohydrate consumption. And that's normal. And females get it more than males. It's just, that's how it is in the research. Now, you have the ability as an athlete to train the gut to improve gastric emptying from the stomach into the small intestine, and then also the absorption of the carbohydrates from the small intestine into the bloodstream. So you can improve that through repeated efforts of high carbohydrate fueling. So in Caitlin's case, it's practicing in the sessions that are appropriate, i.e., if we said Z3, would everyone understand that? Yeah. So
Yeah,
Z3
like zone
or
3,
above.
yeah.
Zone 3 or above, or at least at race pace or above, you're starting to think, okay, I need to practice my race fueling in these sessions. Now, obviously, if it's a 45-minute session, you're probably not going to do that. But I think anytime on the bike, you're getting over sort of 75, 80 minutes, then you should start to consider using your race fuel in those sessions to practice what's going to actually happen in a race scenario. So in effect, you're just doing a simulation, much like you would be practicing, you're doing your race simulation from a training perspective. You're practicing your nutrition from that perspective. And you're really interesting. I think because we saw, like, initially you thought you were taking in a lot of carbohydrates
Yeah.
per hour, and it's still an ongoing thing. It's like, no, we need to get you up well above 70 grams an hour. Actually, we're targeting, at least 90 grams an hour on the bike to match her energy expenditure and hopefully match what, is going to be a much faster bike split.
Yeah, definitely. And when I posted that reel about Ironman Cozumel and like what I took in during the whole race, one of the biggest questions was like, how do you carry all of that stuff? And I practiced a lot of it. Obviously, like the weather was warm, I was riding outside a lot, so I was able to practice like carrying everything with me. But you also really helped me dial in like what products to use, and which ones, because I remember I was using one specific type of gummy that really didn't have a ton of carbohydrates in it, but it took up a lot of space.
Yeah.
And so we switched to another one that was a little more concentrated, so I didn't have to like carry as much stuff with me. But I think like, especially for the longer distance races, like the Ironman, even half Ironman distance races, like those logistical things are something that like you need to practice during training, because you can't get to a race scenario and not know like how you're gonna store things on your bike. Are you gonna carry things in your pocket? Are you gonna use special needs bags for the Ironman? How am I gonna carry all these water bottles? Am I gonna stop at an aid station? Like, what am I doing? So that's been really, really helpful.
And I think like what you said about the actual products, I think that's a really important point, because then you've got the palatability element of it. Like, what can you actually swallow in large amounts
Yeah.
repeatedly across, in a 70.3 in 4 and a bit hours? Like, what are you comfortable with consuming over and over again? And that takes practice. Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, actually, I mean, it's tough. Like, I mean, I'll hold my hand up. I'm training for my first 70.3, and God, it's like, oh God, it's very repetitive. So probably
Yeah.
having two types of products. Now, whether that's, again, probably, and something we worked on with you is like maybe reducing, total carbohydrate liquid, but increasing things like gels and blocks on the bike to allow you
Mhm.
to get to that, upper limit of carbohydrate per hours. But then on the bike, on the run, okay, which gels are we actually going to use, and which are going to give you your biggest bang for your buck? And, now
Yeah.
you're using a gel that supplies you with 30 grams per gel. It's like, okay, if I have 3 of these in an hour, that's 90 grams an hour. It's simple math. You don't have to think about that. That's just, oh, I've got to eat one every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
trying to simplify it for you, really.
Yeah, for sure. I think you had me take in a gel for Cozumel, like I think it was every 2 miles, and I had never done that before ever during a race. I think I took like my old strategy was like one gel every 40 minutes or something
Yeah.
like that, and then just like relying on stuff at the aid station. And I was like, why am I crashing so much like halfway through this Ironman marathon? I just like, why am I bonking? But but yeah, that's been kind of like a game changer for me, as well as doing a lot of the training, in my training, like sweat testing type stuff. So testing my sweat rate, and I had had my sweat concentration tested in a lab before, so we kind of had some information about like what my sodium concentration is, for my sweat rate. But talk a little bit more for us about, like why I'm doing all of this sweat testing.
Yeah, so I think if you want to break down sweat testing, there's sweat sodium testing, which you can get done by certain companies. So someone like Precision Hydration will do a sweat sodium test, and that will give an estimate of the average amount of sodium that's lost in a liter of fluid from your sweat. And that's done, they'll do it either site specific or whole body specific. Now that gives you an indication of how much sodium you may require to then replace. What we do at Fuelin, and what you've done a lot more of and getting better at, is doing what we call sweat rate testing. So this is where Caitlin will weigh herself before a session, generally just in underwear, and then after the session in the same attire. And then what she'll do is record what she consumed during that session in terms of fluids, carbohydrates, electrolytes, and then she'll put all that information into the app and it will do a calculation. And what that provides her with, and what provides me with, is what her average fluid intake is, what her average fluid loss was, what her percentage of body weight loss is, and then what the average amount of fluid intake she should actually ingest to maintain a level of body weight loss. So we generally try and keep her percentage of body weight loss lower than 3% for training. There is, conjecture between try and keep it less than 2% in some of the research, but I think aiming to keep it at least less than 3% is pretty steady. And then, so what she's doing is building a bank of information based on all of those data points, specific to the bike, specific to the run, and then specific to temperatures. So we split it into less than 85 or more than 85, and then either at race pace or below race pace. So what it allows her to be empowered with, okay, I've got a Z3 2-hour bike session. I know that I need to consume roughly 26 ounces of fluid per hour. Okay, what does that look like from a practical standpoint? Okay, I need to have 3 bottles on my bike to allow me to hydrate correctly for this session. And so that's going to improve a number of things. It improves her hydration status, but secondly, it improves her ability to practice correct hydration strategy on the bike in these training sessions, preparing for her race. And I think that's the biggest, I think for you, that was one of the big aha moments. It's like, oh, so what I'm practicing in training is actually going to help me in racing. And I think it's always one of those things that just takes a few times to get, oh, okay, I can see how this is actually just practicing my nutrition to help racing. Yeah. And they're not separate. I think that's the biggest takeaway from here would be, don't separate training nutrition from race nutrition. Like, it's all blended, and same with your hydration strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Question for you. This is one of the questions we got in the announcement post about this IG live. Should you train fasted?
Well, if you read some of the current social media stuff, no, you shouldn't, because apparently it'll kill you. Look, I think it's, I think the fasting, look, when you look at fasting research, a lot of it's done on middle-aged, overweight or obese individuals, and it's helped a lot with improving weight loss and whatnot. It's not necessarily superior, though, to a calorie-controlled diet in terms of total weight loss and things like that. So if we're talking about that from a health perspective and a weight loss perspective, if it works for you, fasting can be really, really great. If it doesn't work for you, then don't worry, just get your energy balance in order. In terms of fasted training, I think if you've got a session up to 60 minutes long, I can't see too many problems, and it's of fairly low intensity. Even if it's Z3 or above, look, you're certainly going to be okay. You're not going to drop dead or anything like that. I think the most important thing is don't continue that fast after that session. So I think this is where people get a little bit confused. So, oh, I can't do fasted training anymore. No, you could do some fasted training in the morning if that's your preference, but just remember to eat after that session. Don't continue doing another 8 hours of fasting, because as we touched on, things like your bone mineral markers could be negatively impacted. And for a female, it could have adverse impact on hormonal profile and whatnot. For men, maybe it's not as bad, and maybe you could extend it. But my recommendation, if you're in season, trying to perform at your best, yes, you could do some fasted training in the morning if that's your preference, but certainly don't continue the fast after that training session.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think for me specifically, as a female athlete, working with a lot of female athletes, both from a coaching perspective and a PT perspective, I wouldn't really recommend fasted training for a lot of women, especially if they are at a risk for developing a bone stress injury, just because when you think about stress levels in the body, cortisol levels, I think they tend to be the highest in the morning, like the first 30 minutes or so after you wake. And I think those can negatively impact that bone mineral density and that energy availability. So
Yeah.
I personally don't train fasted, and I don't think I ever will. I don't know if you have any thoughts or opinions about like whether or not women should be training fasted, especially if they're like, training for like sport.
Look, I think it's a very polarizing, and people are looking at this in a black and white method, and it's just so wrong because there's a lot of gray area around this. Like, if you're going out and doing a 60-minute low intensity slash jog walk, I'm sorry, you can do that without eating, a massive breakfast beforehand. Like, if we're talking about energy balance and getting energy balance in right in order to improve body composition, then yes, you have to be in a caloric deficit. So at some point, you've got to get that energy balance right. I think, if you're going out and doing, more than 60 minutes and it's Z3 or above, certainly eat something before. You're going to feel better in the session as well. Like, no one has done a fasted session, which is high intensity, fasted and felt just as good as someone who has had like something as simple as a piece of toast beforehand. So I think in that respect, like, look, I just think like it's getting all too black and white with the whole fasting thing. And there are certain circumstances where fasted training could be advantageous. And again, a lot of it comes down to personal preference. Some people just are quite happy to do a session, a 60-minute run, on an empty stomach, and they feel it works for them. I think to your point about anyone who is at risk of low energy availability or bone stress injuries, then yeah, you shouldn't be doing fasted training because you've probably already got an energy balance equation issue.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably like not if you're suffering from things like that, yeah, fasted training certainly isn't going to be your thing. Menopausal women, probably not. I just think like, again, yeah, you're probably going into, those people, those individuals who are maybe more at risk of bone stress injuries. So I think for menopausal women, again, I probably wouldn't be recommending fasted training. Again, if it was a 30-minute jog walk, yeah, you're going to be all right. But, anything above that, or you feel like you need to have some fuel on board, there's certainly nothing wrong with eating before a session as well. Again,
Yeah.
it's total energy balance across the day that's going to be the most important
Yep.
thing if your goal is improving body composition or improving weight loss.
Definitely. Definitely. Taking things back a little bit to, this was a question that we got that I am kind of curious as well. More like scientifically talking about the difference between bonking, like from a nutrition and hydration standpoint versus like just blowing up because you went out too hard sort of thing. And I think I can touch a little bit too, like about, my experience at Ironman Florida, I think in 2021, and like, I don't think I took in any electrolytes during that race, and I like struggled severely halfway through the marathon. Just like things completely went downhill. But like when you're in a race situation, how do you know like whether or not you are bonking from a nutritional standpoint or just from like a muscle fatigue standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's all going to come back to what you've practiced in training. So, if your intake has been, if you're consuming, on the bike, Galen, and we get up to this sort of 90 grams an hour on the bike, 90 to 120, and you're taking that in, and you suddenly start feeling, muscular fatigue or whatnot, you're probably looking down at your numbers and your heart rate, and you've maybe been pushing a little bit too high. It's probably not what you're taking in on the bike at that point in time. And certainly if you've
Yeah.
done a carbohydrate load in the 24 to 48 hours before, you've maximized muscle glycogen, liver glycogen, it's not going to be a bonk from lack of glycogen. It's probably you've just gone out too hard. And so, I mean, you could probably answer that better. Like, what are you looking at on your metrics to make sure you're in the zones that you allow you to perform at your best, but maybe not go too high? I mean, I imagine it's to do with threshold, and you probably have key markers. What do you look at on the bike, for instance?
Yeah, I look a lot at power. I don't race with heart rate. It's on my watch, like my Garmin, but it's optical and sometimes it's not super accurate. But I got into the sport not really having a lot of data. Like I didn't have a power meter until maybe like 3 years ago. Didn't really use heart rate, and so I really like the freedom of being able to like listen to my body and kind of gauge how I'm doing physiologically, what's happening based on how I feel, versus like relying on the numbers. But I will use power. Obviously, I have power targets for races. I check in with my heart rate occasionally, but again, sometimes it's kind of off. But I feel like I have a pretty good like insight into what is happening when I'm racing and when things start to go wrong. And I think, when it comes to like triathlon and like the bike leg of the race, I would hope that you're not in some sort of like glycogen deficit like that early on in the race, because it's going to be a really long day if you are. But the run is usually like the run off the bike is usually where things tend to go wrong. And it's usually like halfway through, whether it's like, a hydration issue, an electrolyte imbalance issue, glycogen store issue. I think for during Kona last year, I just had like everything go wrong. And I like, was in the middle of the marathon, like walking, and I just had no idea what was happening, like with my body. I was like, am I low in electrolytes? Am I like hyponatremic? Am I just severely dehydrated? Am I low on sugar? And I just, had no idea what was happening. I wasn't necessarily cramping, but I had literally nothing left to give. And I was like trying to go to the bathroom, trying to pee, and like nothing would come out. And I think they like weighed me after the race, and I had lost like 8 pounds maybe. And I think I realized they like did some blood work and stuff that it was just like severe like dehydration. Because I think I had lost maybe like 6 or 7% body weight,
Yeah, and
which is not good.
no, it's not. And when you get up into 10% body weight loss, that's when it's like, it becomes serious. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's, you know, everything you said there, like, what was it? Well, bonking and cramping in particular, no one understands cramping. So cramping is not scientifically explained, which I know is a bit of a crazy thing to say, but it's not actually understood. But it's probably a combination of everything you mentioned. So hydration status, sodium, carbohydrate intake. Then there's muscular fatigue thrown in over the top. So, in the case of Kona for you, you probably didn't really understand what your sweat rate was in that temperature on the bike. Your carbohydrate intake, I'm guessing was probably, a bit low. Your sodium intake, we didn't actually know how much you took in. So you then get off the bike. If your carbohydrate intake was low, with huge sweat rate, with low fluid intake, and then low amounts of sodium, you get into the run, you can see where things start to go wrong. Whereas, you then had Koh Samar, and, you obviously had some bike issues there, but the run felt good, and it was hot and it was humid, but you had much better hydration, you had much better carbohydrate intake on the bike, which I always think that sets you up. I heard a really good thing the other day about Ironman. It was like, if you hate the swim, which I do, the swim is just warm up for the bike. And that's how you should, if you can just approach the swim as, it's just warm up till I get on the bike, that's great. But maybe in the same breath, the bike is actually just then really getting you prepped for the run.
Yeah.
And so everything you're doing before the swim is going to prep you to get through the swim and onto the bike. And then everything you're doing on the bike is actually prepping you to get ready for your best run. And I think that's a really nice analogy to think about. And it sort of takes the pain away a little bit from it all as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I had my nutrition on the bike was like pretty timed. Like the race literally flew by for me like the whole day, because I had my whole nutrition plan laid out, like what I was supposed to take in, at this mile marker, this time for the bike and the run, and like getting my fluids in and picking up bottles from the aid station and all of that stuff, that like it felt so good to have a plan to follow. And it made it's so much easier for me to break the day into little chunks. You know, getting, you know, to this mile marker, I'm going to take this gel, or on the bike, like at this aid station, I'm going to grab a water bottle, or like, okay, we're like an hour into the bike, or, you know, what, 20 miles into the bike. Now I have to take like these blocks or something like that. And really spacing all of that out. And like having like a clear plan. I was like up the night before the race looking at our spreadsheet, and I was like, okay, I gotta like remember like this is what I'm taking in, and like I think I've got it all, like as I was like prepping for like a game or something, like strategy. And yeah, it just took like the whole like guessing game out of it, because I like knew like, you know, we had practiced this for like weeks prior leading up to it. Like, you know, I was comfortable with all of the products I was taking in. Like, this was my plan. I'm just going to follow it, and like, I should have a good outcome.
Yeah, I think I remember, and for those athletes or the people listening, I remember Sarah Piampiano has since retired. That she always said to me, "It's like just an eating contest," you know,
Yeah.
and it stopped her. It used to stop her from getting bored. You
Yeah.
know, she'd be like, it was just a long race while I had to eat a lot of food, and I think it's always nice to hear that. Like she was just so focused on eating a lot, and obviously results speak for themselves. So.
Yeah.
I see there's a heap of questions. Do you want to? Someone asked a question about, do you get sore as a professional athlete?
Oh,
Fatima,
yes.
asked it.
Yeah.
Do you get sore, Caitlin?
I do, especially like, you know, early on in the season, like as I'm getting back into training after taking my off season. I actually just texted my coach right before this call, because I did like a little kind of bike run event here in Boulder, Colorado, probably a week and a half ago now. And it was you know, we ran a 10K first, and then we biked like a 50K on gravel, and my legs were pretty much shot after, just like really, really sore. And I kind of jumped right back into training, and, you know, a lot of intensity. And I like, it started to do a bike workout this afternoon, and I was like, my legs just feel like sore. Like my quads just feel really sore still, and like really tired. And so we talked about, you know, adjusting like the rest of the week just to help me absorb some of that training load a little bit better, which is going to be really helpful. And like I always try to be vocal about that with my coach, and I always encourage my athletes to be vocal about that as well. Like if you're feeling a lot of soreness, you know, it obviously could be a nutritional issue. It could be, you know, other stressors in your life that are negatively impacting your recovery. But regardless, you know, if you're experiencing this kind of soreness like pretty regularly from a training perspective, like it's definitely something to be addressed. And, you know, for me personally, like we're gonna dial back my training a little bit so I can absorb that load and let my muscles recover. But other than that, you know, once I get into the season, I don't really get too sore after big training sessions. Like I'll wake up the next morning and be tired. But I don't truly get like sore unless I like, you know, put in a really race specific effort or I race. And the interesting thing about that is, so I've been doing the last couple years like some pretty consistent strength training, like twice a week, work with a strength coach. And the biggest thing that I have noticed in doing that is that I recover so much faster after my sessions, and I don't get as sore after races. Because I used to like wake up the morning and after an Ironman, and I like literally could not like get out of bed because my muscles were so sore. And like I still do get sore after an Ironman. Obviously it's like a hard effort and it's a long day, but like I mean, I actually didn't get sore after Kona because I walked almost the whole marathon. But the next day I was like, did I even do anything the day before? Like, why? Like, nothing. Like, I feel like I could go out for a run the day after the Ironman, and that's when, you know, it was a bad day. But but yeah, I think the strength training, and especially like, you know, being on top of your nutrition from a recovery standpoint is going to help mitigate some of that soreness. And maybe you can speak a little bit more to that in terms of like recovery nutrition.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like if you look at, you know, muscle soreness and a lot of the research around it's a little bit equivocal in terms of, does taking on extra protein immediately dampen things like delayed onset muscle soreness or DOMS. But I think certainly what we see anecdotally from athletes is when they've got those higher intensity sessions and they're fueling appropriately within them, the recovery certainly seems to be better, and the trends in terms of recovery, in terms of mood and energy and muscle soreness, the following day certainly trends in a positive direction. So I think there is something to it. I think, again, it comes down to energy balance. I think trying to dampen down things like those inflammatory markers. So again, fish oils or eating small oily fish, there is some evidence supporting sort of, the intake of 3 to 4 grams of omega-3s certainly post weights training to reduce delayed onset muscle soreness. I think it seems to have similar effects with endurance training, and dampening down some of those pro-inflammatory sort of cytokines or markers in the body. I think keeping your protein intake up, again, if you think of every cell in the body is going to, contain protein, then it sort of makes sense. I know we were talking about recovery from injury, and again, the evidence on it is fairly equivocal, but I think it certainly makes sense. If you don't have optimal amounts of protein, then your body's certainly not going to trigger the processes that allow for muscle protein synthesis to occur. So I think, at optimal or adequate carbohydrate intake, optimal and adequate protein amounts, and then the fat is really what just bolsters up, total calories for the day and for the meals. So that's how I would be approaching that.
Yeah, for sure. And I, sleep is obviously like pretty critical when it comes to muscle recovery. We had traveled to Boston this past weekend and didn't get a lot of sleep, getting up early for the flight and, getting in late, from the flight. And so I think that definitely just kind of like, just made me not so like resilient, in terms of absorbing that training load. So
I did laugh about that flight though. I was like, surely that doesn't give you jet lag. I was like, I just flew back from San Fran to Sydney, and I'm pretty sure I had jet lag.
yeah, for
No,
everyone.
look,
Yeah.
I think, look, flying and sleep in particular, as you touched on, Caitlin, like sleep is so important for the athlete, and just do not, for actually not just an athlete, for Gen Pop as well. I think sleep is only something, and it's crazy, it's only in probably the last three or 4 years where really there's been an emphasis on the importance of sleep, the importance for health, and then the importance for recovery and performance. And I think as an absolute minimum, everyone should be aiming for at least 7 hours of sleep per night, and then adjusting that maybe half an hour or an hour in each direction based on what their individual needs are. But from non-communicable type diseases, so heart disease, cognitive decline, things like Alzheimer's and metabolic syndrome, diabetes, there's certainly a lot of it's correlation with the evidence, but it's certainly, I think if you start to see enough of that evidence, it starts to make sense. And then from a performance standpoint, you're going to be recovering. Your body is actually physically recovering during those sleeping moments. So, get as much deep sleep as you can, maximize sleep hours, because it certainly will help you feel better the next day.
Any recommendations for like supplements or things? I know this is a question probably most people have, at like how to improve your sleep, from like a nutrition standpoint or a supplement standpoint. Any recommendations? I know you had, in that post, you had talked about magnesium supplementation for like, jet lag and flying and stuff like that. But
I wrote an article on this that's on our website at fuelin.com. One of the best things actually to help sleep, and again, it seems funny, but fruit and vegetables. Again, the research will show somewhere between 5 and 7 servings of fruit and vegetables consistently over an individual's lifespan, or over certainly yearly periods, is going to improve duration and quality of sleep. So I think everyone reaches for the magic powders first, but again, fruit and vegetables, there's probably a reason your mum and your grandma told you to eat a lot of them, because they are actually very good for you. So and there's reasons for that, because they're going to contain carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are important for helping shuttle certain amino acids across the blood-brain barrier, namely tryptophan. Tryptophan is found in other types of foods, so things like animal proteins is where you're going to find the tryptophan, but the carbohydrates help
turkey.
that. Yeah, exactly. Turkey and some dairy and things like that. But your fruit and veg, then, you've got your B5s, your B6s, going to be found in there. And then magnesium helps with that transformation from serotonin into melatonin. And so something like a high carb meal with some protein before bed can be effective in helping that sort of sleep cycle get initiated. So that's
Yeah.
probably more on that side of things. I think supplements, certainly if you're going to reach for a supplement, I wouldn't be reaching for melatonin. Melatonin is at the back end of that pathway. And I think there's been enough said recently about the probably overconsumption of melatonin as a product to help with sleep. I think you want to be thinking, what are the steps beforehand? So something like magnesium, which is integral to the formation of melatonin, could be useful. Magnesium in particular would be magnesium bisglycinate or magnesium glycinate. The company Pillar do one which is
Yeah.
called a triple magnesium. It supplies around 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium with a combination. I think it's magnesium citrate, magnesium chelate, and magnesium bisglycinate or glycinate. And it works. Magnesium glycinate is really rapidly absorbed. Oh, well, it's not rapidly absorbed. It's got very good bioavailability. So around 95% of it is absorbed by the body, as opposed to something like a magnesium oxide, which has about 5% bioavailability. So if you look at supplements, a lot of supplements will have
Yeah.
things like magnesium oxide in it because it's extremely cheap, but actually the amount that the body absorbs is very minimal. So again,
Okay.
usually with supplements, you probably pay a little bit more, you get better quality, generally speaking. If something's really cheap, it's probably because it is really cheap.
Yeah. Just kind of a waste.
Yeah, exactly. So always do your due diligence on your supplementation if you are taking it. And
Yeah.
certainly if you are an athlete and you're concerned about things like drugs testing, and obviously any supplement you do take is your responsibility. Whether someone's telling you to take it or suggesting you take it, it is still your responsibility as an athlete. And if you did test positive for a banned substance, it is your responsibility. So you can limit the risk by taking supplements that are either NSF Sport, Informed Sport, or HASTA certified. Those three sort of certifications will at least significantly reduce the risk of a contaminated supplement being ingested.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely really important to touch on that.
Yeah,
So,
no, I think it is.
um, awesome. Well, we've been chatting for almost an hour here.
I know. Did we
Which
answer all the
is,
questions?
well, I think we answered most of them. And obviously, if any of you have additional questions for Scott, you can always reach out to him on the Get Fuelin Instagram. He's a fantastic resource. Get Fuelin is a fantastic company. They have, I think we've touched on the app that has been super helpful in planning out and just giving recommendations for your daily training and racing nutrition. Do you want to touch on anything else about Get Fuelin as a company?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll share a link after this, which will be a recap. It's going to be an opportunity to win a one-to-one consultation with myself. So Caitlin will share that. We'll share that, and I believe Training Peaks will share that as well. And you can sign up for our newsletter. We usually do a weekly Q&A session, which is all things nutrition. And we then provide that as the summary in the weekly newsletter, which is fairly easily digestible, excuse the pun, but a lot of practical takeaways that athletes can get started on straight away. So yeah, and just check out the website. It's fuelin.com. You can have a look at the new programs. There is a new tier, which is on an annual basis, just $29 a month on what we call the pilot program, and that provides you with all the nutrition planning that Caitlin gets. So it's no different from that. Everyone gets the same program. The only difference is the amount of interaction you get with a registered nutritionist, such as myself or Elizabeth Emben.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you guys so
That,
much. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. I'm going to save this to my profile. So if anyone missed it, or if you just kind of want to tune back in and touch on a couple things that we talked about, you should be able to access it there. But thank you so much, Scott, for sharing your time. I really, really appreciate it. I actually learned a lot from this session too, so it was really good for me. But yeah, I really appreciate everything that you've done for me so far. So thank you.
No, awesome, Kevin. Thank you so much for hosting.
Of course, everyone have a good night. For me, it's nighttime. But yeah, everyone enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Really great.
Bye.